Good evening, everyone. For those of you for whom it's evening, welcome to our Wednesday night in birth under night stream. This is Rillian, and we are going into probably the first practice some of us have had in this game in just under a year. But it's definitely not the sort of game where you lose everything by not playing it for a while, and we have also been playing both DNF Duel during the betas and our Melty Blood battles, which, while they're different in mechanics a bit, the focal points of the games are similar enough. Ranges might be a little difficult though. As is the oh wait, I can't air dash bit. So we're shaking the rest off basically. And as a result, we've only got one open slot today. But my body slowly remembers. Is this like a actual place in Japan? This bridge? That is the reason we have made the stream title and tweet as they are, because I was just thinking to myself randomly while playing earlier, or rather while preparing to play earlier, do I actually know where they are? Oh, that's what's going on here. My buttons are wrong. I'll fix that later. Another thing that actually is probably worth discussing with even a little bit, for people who are not particularly used to fighting games, when you play multi-games like us, it's really important to make sure that whatever it is you do for your buttons will feel the same across all your characters. I find it unlikely that most people are both multi-game players and multi-character players, in the sense that you just play everyone in the cast or try to. So it becomes much harder. Fortunately, the way that my buttons are wrong is very minor, and probably enough that I can get away with it. Right now I'm playing off of muscle memory to the fact that that even worked. I practiced that so much that it just happens. So that's probably a good sign. But this one is going to be harder to do, since I'm used to hitting circle for that move. I will still always ask, why did they give this character command grab? I love it, but why did they give it to him? So since we're just getting over Rust, this is our EU stream. We saw one other lounge open with probably much higher ranked persons, so if you are relatively good at this game, we suggest you jump in there, at least if they're good connection to you. But if you aren't so confident, especially in a situation where you feel like you understand the game, you know your combos, your pressure, but don't feel like so comfortable with spacing or the way you think about matches, you'll probably get a bit more out of fighting us than the other way around, or at least, if that lounge is full, we could be your preference. Today I'm less likely to have analysis to give, partially because, one, there are less people in the lounge, and I'll save that sort of thing for tonight's NA lounge. And because, like I said, rust, so much rust. Fortunately, this game is really intuitive in terms of its combos in a specific way. If it looks like you can hit, you probably can. So you don't have to spend as much time learning perfect combo routes for difficult confirms or similar. There's also just enough hit stun for a more experienced player to be able to do weird hit confirms like that. So when I land that hit, my thought is, what will get me to that position to hit my opponent again? Which of my moves can I target at that spot? And just practicing enough with bots or in general at targeting spots and increasing your accuracy with various moves leads to the same thing. 3 rounds, I think? We will have the usual 2 MK marker on the lounge if you have trouble finding it otherwise, for some reason. But that sort of thing, yes. I don't actually know that as a combo that I've ever practiced. It just looks like something I should be able to do, so I do it. Of course, I'm still overlooking mechanics such as that, which I'll get back into using in a bit, I think. Didn't know that worked either. I'll add that to my repertoire as a way to recover from dropping the combo the way I prefer to do it. That way. Ah, the bat dash, perfectly done. Sun probably has to work a bit on punishes later on, but again, rust. Ori is also not quite as good at the I'm going to keep my combo going simply because I know where you are. Not necessarily because she can't hit, but because the moves she hits with don't always have follow-ups. Or the opponent can tech out of them more easily before next thing can happen. This is going to be a relatively shorter stream, or rather, the new standard for stream length, and therefore last only about 1 hour. That said, having managed to do this yesterday, I don't expect to have too many problems with adapting to this fact either. Alright, that moves. More options for accurate points to hit from. It's definitely one of the things that is most interesting when playing a game again, having to remember all of your options. Games that have few options are therefore a lot more popular for certain types of players because you can pick them up and never feel like, oh no, I can't play this game anymore, or, you know, deal with the standard problems that comes with dealing with players who aren't as nice or are stressful online, who don't realize you've forgotten something, or are just playing their best and not really thinking about what you do or do not do. But I'm more so talking about the ones who have a lot to say about it afterwards. Dropped it that time. I'm still working on exactly how to bait that one, but I think my opponent knows that, so we're gonna see a shift soon enough. Yep. Have to set up different bait situations for this to help. And just walking out of the way of that is a very valid dodge. Ah, that's why I told you it was gonna hit me. Oh well. There we go. That's literally all I needed to do, so here we go into this match now. While I can generally get my brain to do things to update use this button instead of this button for this normal. Remapping for normals is a thing I can do quickly. Remapping for specials is a thing I cannot. So I spent a large part of that round trying to do the same parry, counter, run, command, grab, all in one, with the wrong button. And now I forgot to remap the other way back and I've got to switch it again. Still, it's one of those things you deal with in life when you mess with your controller buttons. It's much worse when you do this to yourself in tournaments. This character always gives me slight stress because her ranges are deceptive and they're always very slightly longer than Seth's are. Meaning that you have to change the way you think about what you're doing in the match. Whereas normally I am trying to advance into a position where I should hit. Here my better bet is to fake that advance so that my opponent hits the spot I might be in, and I can repunish it. Come on, switch back. Despite having this relatively lenient combo system, you still want to have your own personal best ones. And unlike Melty Blood, where after a certain while you're basically doing no damage, that's not really true here in the strict same sense. It matters a lot more what your combo started with, but despite the fact that they can go on for fairly long, usually this only happens by using meter and setups so that you will be doing more damage. That setup was good. Because of this, we have a lot more bots that focus on teaching you how to do specifics in your combos. And dealing with things like learning the Vorpal system so that you can benefit from it directly. Even though this game is relatively explosive, it's not quite as fast. One of the best things you can do for yourself is in fact to try to watch while one move is coming out to whatever the next one needs to be, because even though it might not look like that, if things aren't too laggy, you can actually see. The hit stop, let's say, is long enough that if you're fairly good, you can make a decision outright about what's going to be happening next. You spend a lot of time getting used to how to stand and which buttons to use for different situations. That, for example, was a moment of me realizing, I'm just going to hit a very normal hit here. I'm not going to be in the usual situation I can use. But I do have a different path through this combo as a result of that. If you're getting used to this game for the first time, even though it's quite old and probably most people who will get into it have already done so, you might also just not have stuck with it because you didn't feel like you were good enough. But you can definitely do that sort of experimentation. If you're too used to games where the thing you're aiming to do is find the best single combo, because, you know, that is what anime games were popular for a while back. Even if you're not necessarily interested in playing this game, with DNF Duel coming out, one of the issues with that for a lot of people is that it has a very similar flow. You spend a lot of time in that game thinking that you must do your combo correctly, when a lot of the time you can just hit the next thing. This woman's hitboxes. So if you're itching to play DNF, I wouldn't necessarily suggest you go online to play this game, but you can definitely get more out of it than just, oh, this is an old game that I'm never going to play or be good at. Because there's definitely things you can learn in this game that convert to DNF better than a lot of other games. If anything, this is the one I would recommend for that purpose. Of course, the problem you will face is that the ranges in DNF Duel aren't necessarily longer or better per se, but the spacings are a little bit more complicated. Your characters move around slower in neutral, and they're, you know, just larger on the screen, even at the zoomed out form, which will always give the impression that their normals are slightly shorter. Oh, I did have Vorpal. I've so much forgotten in this game that I don't know what Seth's Vorpal does. Seth is a really good point for me on that front, because a lot of what I've done in DNF Duel lately with the Kunoichi is based on the principles of fighting that I have from this character. Sure, it's different when your sort of ninjutsu magic has to actually target your opponent instead of just sticking on them as an effect. But it's not that different, because the thing you're using it for is moving toward the opponent at a time when they can't afford to try to counterattack it. They can get out of the way, at least in this case, so it makes it a little bit harder, but Seth has a lot of options, so you don't really mind if they can get out of the way for a bit. If anything, she's missing the fact she doesn't have a sweep. And Seth has the cheap sweep that technically can't be punished. It's just a normal I get to hit. If the sound is off, I'm sorry about it, because I think I normally set the volume on this game pretty low, but it plays to me differently than it probably does on stream. This is often my experience with it. And halfway through stream we have one joiner. So normally, as you can probably see from like their color or whatever, you should be expecting a lot more destructiveness, a lot more combo skill, and so on. When facing players of this level that are generally above you, one of your main focuses should be to quickly overcome their first order strategy so that they just have to switch to something else. Most of what you care about is just, what is your first order and what am I going to do about it? And don't give them like the benefit of the doubt or anything, just immediately assume that their first order is whatever they're showing you, because that's what you're fighting against. It's literally the first order they're showing you. For example, here we have an Outlaw who is basically maintaining range and dashing into lows, presumably because they think that the grounded game isn't going to work the same way as before. The combos, just like the other, are irrelevant. They're just going to be people building meter, doing damage, and it's not always that much damage. The meter in this game is the way they get that damage, but it's hard to remember these things because other games don't feel the same. Even though the animations are just as long, you're just getting hit more often, which, you know, for some people feels kind of bad. If you're used to slower games, particularly 3D games, though not really Tekken, because Tekken actually does cause you to get hit for so long and so much that these sorts of games may feel right at home. Once the opponent's first order strategy is gone, most likely they'll move to pressure. And once they've moved to pressure, you can use your guard button, usually crouching guard, to get yourself through whatever needs to happen. In this case, I believe it's shield that I'm talking about. This will allow you to get Vorpal and at least deny them the benefit of other further things. The great part about this game is that it has the invincible backdash, meaning that if you don't actually think you can get out of the situation by doing that, and that the pressure is too much and they'll eventually break you, you can backdash out from the very beginning, or you can backdash out at whatever point you think their next attack is going to take a while. So you don't necessarily have to deal with pressure. But this Outlaw doesn't seem too interested in applying too much of it, other than the dash up thing. And if you're good at seeing gaps from other games, you'll probably be right at home. If you find yourself getting overwhelmed, it's either because you don't understand the timing of this game, or possibly that you were never particularly good at seeing gaps to begin with. But all this is like meter damage and special effect damage and vorpal damage. So you shouldn't necessarily worry too much about situations like this. This game has a very strong rhythm toward it, which can cause you to get caught in loops and die, but it's not happening because the game itself is completely about that and you just can't do anything. It's usually because you've lost the first order interactions to the point where your opponent managed to give themselves at least some advantage. That, for example, is a conversion off of a single mid-range shot, but it didn't actually hurt that much. Panicking in that way, in that situation, would probably have led to something bad. But similarly there, that was an uppercut. It led to some damage, but not like a lot. So once again, there's not much reason to panic. It's actually one of the biggest optional things you should think of that you're doing well if your opponent has to have repeated interactions with you in order for you to die. Because if you are not playing the neutral correctly, when you get hit, it'll usually be on their terms entirely, and they'll be able to use their big damage and big combos on you. But if you are at this point of, okay, you're hitting me, I'm clearly making mistakes because I don't understand your character, or maybe not even making mistakes, I'm just taking risks that you're waiting for. But it takes a long time for them to kill you, because every time they tap you, they're just tapping you. They're using extra energy to get more damage, and that energy runs out over time. This is particularly helped out by the fact that if you didn't get cornered enough, they can't bully you that way. So you can already see Sun is not necessarily avoiding being hit, not taking this chunk of damage for example, but this is a lot of energy. And it's not a lot of energy to get a huge amount of damage either. It's a lot of energy to get what in many games is more or less a medium amount of damage. Even that. So this is rapid adaptation, more or less. And I hope that the opponent is appreciating it because their playstyle does seem to gel relatively well in here. They're good enough at doing the damage and the conversions that they're not likely to be completely frustrated and be forced into the position of just waiting for a bigger mistake. They're willing to go for the conversion attempts, they're willing to go for bigger stuff and try for pressure, instead of just going, no, I'm not fighting you, I'm going to run away from you altogether and do nothing. Oh, this was a both change one? Let's see. I think I'll drop that one this way. These rotations in this game are always at least somewhat weird. Mika has a little more trouble doing the things required in this matchup because she doesn't have enough invulnerability on a lot of things, and it's easier for Elton to target spots that Mika needs to stand in. So there's a lot of walking, and the walking makes you vulnerable, so it just generally kind of sucks. She also doesn't get much, if anything, out of maintaining Vorpal. So one of the main things you would generally have to practice and master this is stuff related to how to do her aerial rocket punches. Not because it won't get you hit, but because it will absolutely reduce the amount of damage you can take. Your opponent is not given as much control of the match if just rocket punching around is your way of approaching the situation. Her air dash also helps, but not as much because Elton's bullets cover a lot of space. Once you've gotten your opponent thinking in that regard, it's a lot easier to actually get the command grab. And of course, the run speed in this game means if you can sort of figure out what's going to happen, you can't get caught as easily. Yep, there's those conversions again. You can definitely manage with the bots to practice conversions, probably more than anything else. But of course, this is just for specific bots. Other bots are meant to teach you other specific things, because this game has so many mechanics that we had to devote multiple of them to just getting you used to the mechanics. This is going to be hard without those though, because Mika basically can't stay on the ground against this character, and she can't go into the air in any predictable ways either. She must do it a very specific way. This is further compounded by the fact that if she tries to go into the air, but is just jumping over the opponent's head, she doesn't have any way to convert that into damage really. I've forgotten how she actually does the other direction, the other rocket punch, so it could also be that at the moment. And I don't think she has the TK versions of it either. At least not the one, they won't help in the same regard. But as you can see, it's a lot about movement. You're being shot at, but you have like protective arms. The main reason you do this is because Eltnum, like a lot of other characters we deal with, isn't necessarily actually good at putting herself in situations after you've gotten over her head, but the way you get over her head matters a lot. And because Mika basically doesn't want Eltnum near her either, she wants to maintain a slightly beyond mid-range situation. To just move normally doesn't help. But unfortunately, because this is such a it's one of those very linear styles of matchup where you have to be able to do one thing very well, or you just aren't really functional. I don't really have much to offer in terms of advice here, beyond the whole aerial rocket punch forward. I guess I can talk about the fact that whether or not that move is effective has to do with what mind state the opponent is in. This comes up in games like Street Fighter with like the Nakali matchup, a relatively simplistic character, where the thing you're caring about is do they actually feel like attacking you or not. If Nakali feels like attacking, you take one approach, and if Nakali is in defense mode, you do something else. That move, for example, is a really helpful other way of dealing with close range situations because after doing the dive punch, Mika moves back to a space that's helpful. For her, anyway. It's not that Eltnum can't hit her from there, it's just not a good idea. And she can't easily, usually, stop the down rocket punch in itself. So if you're not sure what else is happening, that right there. There's one. Charge version, huh? Of course, Mika's big advantage is that she does way more damage in this matchup. Okay, yes, it is definitely on both Switch, so I think technically that's what's supposed to happen. Or technically it should have been the other way. Well, whatever. At least it's got intense fairly fast. Still a Zoni character, one that's slightly more familiar, and one that while Orie has some weaknesses against Gordeau, they're more so based on the fact that she has to fly a lot better. And she has to fly based on the Gordeau player's mindset at the time. That sort of thing, for example. You can't be trying to hit Gordeau when you fly. You have to be trying to make Gordeau hit you, or rather attempt to, and fail. Eventually, the player will be faced with the idea of, maybe I shouldn't defend or hit buttons when they go skyward. And that is your chance. I didn't notice. Oh no, I think I know where that would have landed. He's also one of those characters who doesn't expect people to do specific things, and can be beaten out in the ways you're seeing here. So, again, this matchup is only really difficult for Orie if you play Orie the way you're used to playing her. But technically this might suit our Orie better, as the general approach being taken is often acrobatic. You'll notice though that what has happened from the Gordeau side is that they're spending a lot more time being active, making sure that just being jumped at in bad situations or misled isn't even a thing that gets to come up. It's not going to happen. But that change means that now playing neutral is what's happening here. It's no longer a, well, I'm going to see how good I am at zoning. So by defeating the standard first order strategy of Gordeau, the space controlling zoning, the match has changed altogether. In a good way, one that actually kind of favors Orie relatively heavily. They can trade those two things all day, and eventually Orie will win. Like, just off of certain conversions, or the fact that she just does more damage than Gordeau does when doing that sort of trade-off. She does it slowly, but yeah. So the match ends up being a lot more stable and relatively easier to understand. That is something that I believe that Sun has learned from playing Street Fighter against certain types of opponents for so long. When they're under stress, when they get to the point of, okay, this is the end of the match, most people default to their 4-starter strategy. You don't necessarily get to assume that they're going to keep doing the same things. Oh, character change. Well, I guess. I wouldn't necessarily want to keep playing it either, especially if they chose that character not because they play Gordeau, but because they were like, well, the Eltnum thing is kind of rough for you, so I'm gonna switch to something fairer. Gordeau is not fairer against Sun's Orie. This is probably fairer, but it's fairer in the other way. So now it's slightly more about, well, what am I supposed to do here? Mika punishes Orie's attacks fairly well when she uses grounded ones. But she doesn't deal so well with Orie's dashing attacks, especially perfectly spaced dashing attacks. Because again, she has very little invincibility on stuff and tends to attack more or less straightforward. Unfortunately, I don't think Sun's had much time to practice the forward dashing, perfect spacing Orie style attacks. So it might be difficult to pull this off regarding that. Ori's good ones, I think, are dashing B and like dashing and then pressing C, but not necessarily using dash C, because that's the dash C. She can also just put up the Thanatos shield as a way to approach, but this doesn't usually lead to anything because Mika will just block. I really hope I wasn't being misleading there because I don't remember how to do the move I'm talking about. Ooh, perfectly spaced Divine Thrust though, because as you saw, there was no actual punish. One of the things that makes this game really interesting is that you can use so much understanding based on watching matches because other people's inputs become visible to you. Like, I don't know why they're mashing ABCD, but it's probably just a recovery option. You can in fact see that this opponent is much mashier than you might expect them to be. But no, it looks like Sun more or less has control of this as a whole because it's too difficult for Mika to do specific things in ranges that where it matters. And even that is just, okay, you burnt all your meter to get this, and unfortunately I have an uppercut, so you can't even be assured of pressure after. Here's a good example of it though. No meter, no Vorpal, no setup. How do you win from here? The answer in this case is that you don't, but you might have had to change your strategy as a whole, come up with something else. But it looks like they're going in on the Mika flow, so maybe we'll see an adaptation that I haven't thought of yet. Mika doesn't really need to adapt in this matchup. It's more so that defending against Aurier is something you have to spend more of your mental focus on, and honestly your attacking can just be pretty much random. As I mentioned before, Aurier doesn't do as much damage converting off of weird hits as some other characters, so making her hit you from weird positions is just a good enough way of reducing the damage you take by itself. And that move, as just demonstrated, will help a lot as well. I was actually surprised that that one was happening that way, but I don't think they actually saw it, because I didn't see it. Specifically saw that it was time to do that and weren't just possibly going to be baited. I expected that, sort of. But some people have reactions beyond what you'd expect. And just the sense of a thing that's going to happen, which helps a lot, obviously. What you need here from the Mika side is mostly relentlessness. Getting your good position for big damage can be so hard that minimizing the damage you're taking is probably your better option. Even accuracy can take kind of a backseat to just making sure that the opponent never has time to rest mentally. This is harder against characters with uppercuts though, because they can force that. You must stop being relentless and always hesitate occasionally simply because they might just uppercut. Against characters who don't have that option, well, it depends, because we're talking only about Aurier in terms of the relentlessness being helpful. One thing you'll notice happen often, and it can't necessarily be considered good or bad, is what's happening in this round. The opponent has to be relentless before they have enough meter, simply because they don't have any meter. And that's why it's sometimes a good idea to uppercut them early, because they have to go for it. They're not going to give big damage based on punishing your uppercut if they have no meter to do that big damage with. They're just going to build up more meter. But I wouldn't necessarily say that was good, because that's overdoing a specific thing in the hopes that it will help. So I'm kind of surprised that they actually changed character. I would have assumed that they were going to like keep going in order to continue refining that play. Carmine is difficult for Ori in a different way, but it's not that there's no way out of it. It's, again, one of those very strong matchup things. Ori can't approach Carmine from the front, so it's back to flying a lot. But one good thing that you can't use against Gordeau, but you can use here, is to dash up and then use her force function to fly overhead. Because honestly, Carmine really sucks at attacking the spot directly over his head. This is so bad, in fact, you can use your force function to get out of pressure sometimes. Just B plus C out. It's not, because as you'll notice, almost all of his attacks just don't go in a direction where he's going to manage to do anything. And all of them take so long and are so directional that you can just ignore it. They also take so long to actually start hitting that yeah, you just do that. Your opponent spends all their time trying to adapt to where you are or where you will be and do all the micro-targeting that his moves require, and it's just so stressful that you get to use this as one of your main time strategies. You can flat out abuse this as a system for dealing with it, until your opponent adapts in some way to the fact that you're using it so much. It's not even that he won't defend, it's that you've locked down his capacity to launch attacks that will actually hurt you. And then, as you see, on the simple adaptation, the shield. Right, see, he doesn't reach, he gets frustrated, he gets into bad situations. It's not terribly hard for Carmine to figure out what to do, but until you start backdashing, you don't get very far. Even here, the same thing would probably have worked, but the worst that will happen is that the Carmine player will attempt to jump themselves instead and you uppercut them. So it's, as usual, a lot of quickly moving through opponent first order strategies. And if you enjoy that part of fighting games, it's relatively easy to do. It's kind of fun, even against people who are trying to either taunt you or change the situation in a way that doesn't suit actually enjoying the game from your perspective, because their first order strategy has to change. We see here a change toward pressure, but that's back to the Gordeau problem. If you've decided we're playing pressure now, I don't have to worry about all your setups and your Carmine bullshit. Because honestly, I don't mean that in a bad way, a lot of Carmine stuff is like definitively bullshit on purpose. You've basically said, oh, we're playing neutral now? Great, I know how to do that, so I don't have to worry about all this other part. I've demonstrated to you that I can get past the other thing you do. So let's play neutral now. And fortunately for our Carmine player, neutral is a part of the game that comes out from all characters. In other words, they know how to play neutral from other places already, so they just have to do their best at that. Now we're at, okay, I'm going to zone you, but this still doesn't work because Oria just ignores it and doesn't care. She can also still put up the shield, and while this won't protect her from the attack, if your health is high enough, in other words, that came up more so because Oria was closer to, oh, I actually don't have enough health for this now. So the opponent switched to the win condition of, you are too low health to take any hits, so it doesn't matter. You notice again there, that's a, I used meter to get a hit and then couldn't convert the hit. Same thing happens. Ooh, that was not expected. That was a really good decision there, I think. Because the only point of that move normally is to reach that spot. But it didn't come up otherwise. So, yeah, overall, super quick, super good on that one. And technically that brings us to the end of stream normally. But This time we started late, so we're going to do one more. And hopefully I will remember to press circle for A. We'll be back later on, of course, for the 7:30 stream on the NA side. And we'll see what comes up then. We might have different players other than me at that point. I still can't decide if I love this stage or hate it, but the music is nice. Okay. My execution's back to normal now. More rocket punches. The other one is actually her force function, so I should probably clarify what I mean by rocket punch. The relatively unsafe one that tends to go forward, that move is what I'm talking about when I say rocket punch. For those of you who were not clear on it before. Does this work? Yes. And that doesn't. Oh well. She is a hard character to backdash away from sometimes. In fact, in general, that's I'd say my biggest problem with this matchup is that Mika's hard to get away from. On top of having to time everything correctly. That one was a spacing issue, rather a spacing problem for my opponent. I don't remember if that move is unlockable that way. I think it is. I forgot. Was that worth it? Don't think it was worth it. If you want to master Seth, one of the largest things you're going to have to get used to is some of his combos only work if you hit from a certain distance. So while you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time practicing the physical aspects of the combo, you have to spend a lot of time recognizing, can this combo actually be done? One useful thing about the whole can't get away from Mika part is that you can actually use attacks to do it because she lacks the length. If you have the timing to go through using this, that is a valid escape because she is, unlike many other characters, trying to be much closer to you. But, as you've just seen, landing that attack from too close prevents you from being able to combo off it. That's just the balance of the game. The move's purpose changes entirely, and you have to kind of think of it as two different moves even though you're doing the same thing. One is for getting away, and one is for dealing damage. Even if it hits the opponent, from that perspective, you shouldn't be thinking, oh good, it's time to do more damage now. No, because it doesn't work, and you're just putting yourself back in the same situation you were trying to get away from. This is usually better solved by throwing these out though, because it limits her movement. At least somewhat. The other option is the standard one I use. Don't do anything. Because Seth can counter a lot of Mika's stuff by doing less rather than more. And technically the two things are related, in that you could use throwing out the orbs as a thing to do with your time. But I do keep on using the wrong one, so let's see if I can get that right before we end the stream. When using Seth orbs, you generally have to think about where your opponent is going to attack, because if you don't have a lot of time to get rid of the orb, you need that to happen. And I'm so used to opponents who run away from me, that remembering to use that one is hard. The useful part about it is that it will generally cause your opponent to think more about the idea that you're going to spend time trying to put orbs out. Which will of course open them up to other things. Nope, looks like I just can't keep it today. But that's fine. I haven't practiced in a while, and eventually I may be able to do it. In the end, we also ended up going a bit too far on. But the timings of these streams aren't as strict as I'm probably making them out to be. You can find all of our Unist bots. Technically, this is under CLR, but... Wait, is it? I'm not sure which version I'm actually on, because it does weird things. I figure it must be. You can find all our bots for under Unist bots, because we haven't actually gotten around to making any changes for CLR at all. So even though technically that's the version of the game we're playing now. The bots are still going to be on our website 2-mk.org under that marker. So you can check that out. They're a little bit more hard to input and use than a lot, but they can be used for longer periods. So if you're getting into the game or just preparing for DNF Duel, you can use them to get you through some things if you don't have too much trouble with the inputs themselves. That brings us to the end of today's EU stream. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.